The world's biggest powers are tearing apart the global and trade map, leaving a yawning gap. And one continent is perfectly placed to leap into that gap. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, now says Africa has a golden chance to reshape its future. While the US and China fight, Africa can act. Let's unpack why that matters, what the risks are, and how the continent could actually transform. What's going on? A trade war like we've not seen. The US and China, the world's trade. Heavyweights are locked in escalating tariffs, export controls, and supply chain retaliation. According to the IMF, this isn't just about the two nations fighting. It's about global trade shifting, supply chains rerouting, and the risk of geoeconomic fragmentation, that is, trade blocks, decoupling, regionalism, increasing. For example, the ratio of trade to GDP globally hasn't collapsed yet, but the pattern of trade is changing. We are seeing a lot less trade between the US and China, but we are seeing a lot more trade between either the US or China and other parts of the world. The IMF cautions, if things escalate, global output could drop by 0.3 percentage point or more, and the uncertainty is already weighing on business, investment. In short, as the world's two biggest trading blocs spin off or shift alliances, the global trade ecosystem is scrambling. Why this matters especially for Africa. Africa is not a bystander, according to the IMF's G20 background note. By 2030, 60% of all new entrants into the global labor force will come from Africa. Moreover, sub-Saharan Africa accounts for 30% of the world's critical minerals. The continent can play a huge part in global supply chains, green transition, critical minerals, but only if it positions itself. Because trade between the US and China is faltering or shifting, there is a vacuum, and Africa could become a new node in supply chains or a new crossroad for trade and manufacturing. A key article, What Do US Tariffs Mean for Africa's Supply Chains?, argues that the trade upheaval is an opportunity for Africa to draw a fresh blueprint, one less dependent on raw commodity exports, and more about manufacturing, processing, regional value chains. So, the war between US and China destabilizes global trade, but that instability creates space for Africa to innovate, to reposition. The IMF's view, opportunity for Africa. A recent headline piece. IMF sees opportunity for Africa as US and China blow up global trade. The IMF notes that Africa could benefit from 1. Competitive currencies and regional trade integration that allow firms to serve newer supply chains emerging outside US/China direct trade. 2. Tapping critical minerals for green technologies. According to the IMF, Sub-Saharan Africa holds about 30% of the world's critical mineral reserves, offering an enormous upside if value added. Processing is developed locally. At the same time, the IMF still warns of risks. Although the opportunity is there, Africa's exposure to trade shocks, especially if global fragmentation deepens, is still high. So the message, yes, chance, but not automatic. It needs action. The IMF also emphasizes that Africa's youthful population and fast-growing urban centers give it a unique demographic edge. As global manufacturing searches for affordable labor markets beyond Asia, African economies could attract large-scale industrial investment. New trade corridors like the Lamu Port Dash, South Sudan-Ethiopia Transport LAPS-SET corridor, and the North-South trade route are opening unprecedented connectivity. Combined with digital transformation and renewable energy projects, Africa is poised to become a strategic production and logistics hub in the evolving global order. What can Africa do right now to seize the moment? Here are the key levers. A. Regional integration and intra-Africa trade. The more Africa trades within itself rather than relying purely on exports to the US or China, the more resilient it becomes. Example: The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, is projected by the World Bank to raise Africa's exports by approximately 32% by 2035 and spur foreign investments massively. Deeper cross-border manufacturing, shared value, chains, regional processing, all matter. The recent IMF note, Digging for Opportunity, Harnessing Sub-Saharan Africa's Wealth in Critical Minerals, emphasizes that policy coordination across borders, infrastructure, and regional markets make a big difference. B. Move from raw commodities to value addition. Extracting minerals is one thing, turning them into batteries, electronics, or finished goods is another and far more lucrative. The IMF note states, while Africa holds 30% of critical mineral reserves, just approximately 26% of the activity is processing. The rest is extraction. If Africa can build processing, the returns jump. So, Africa's opportunity lies in capturing more of the value chain rather than simply exporting raw materials. C. Build competitive supply chains and manufacturing nodes for the changing world. As supply chains shift due to tariffs, political risk, deglobalization, Africa can position itself as China +1 in manufacturing, or as a hub for goods, moving between Asia, Europe, Africa. The article on U.S. tariffs suggests Africa's moment is to reduce reliance on outbound raw material trade to build a fresh economic blueprint. D. Strengthen policy, infrastructure, and institutions. Opportunities don't translate unless governments invest in transport, electricity, trade logistics, regulatory reform. African economies that improve transparency in FX, markets, trade facilitation legislation, etc., fared better in the recent tough environment. The IMF also warns about domestic vulnerabilities, e.g., debt, shallow financial systems, exposure to shocks. So the policy foundation matters. What could go wrong? The risk side of the ledger. If global trade really fragments, full decoupling between US and China, Africa could lose rather than win. The IMF models show under some extreme scenarios Africa could suffer welfare losses of approximately 4% of GDP. Heavy dependence on commodity exports means Africa is vulnerable to swings in demand from China or shifts in global supply chains. Without upgrading manufacturing, infrastructure, or diversifying markets, Africa may be left behind or locked into low-value extraction. Domestic risks, high debt levels, weak institutions, and shallow financial markets could hamper ability to seize the opportunity. IMF has flagged these risks for sub-Saharan Africa. Why this matters for you personally. If you're watching where global growth is heading, Africa is no longer a sideshow. It may become a global growth frontier. If you're involved in business, trade, investment, Africa could offer new supply chain hubs and manufacturing spots, natural resource nodes for the green transition. If you believe in global fairness, a shift from Asia/America-dominated trade to a more multi-pole system could bring more chances for countries to carve their own path. If you're curious, the traditional trade map is shifting. This is a moment of structural change, not just cyclical noise. What to watch next? Keep an eye on these signals, how the US and China's trade policies evolve. Tariffs, export bans, rare earth control, the pace of implementation of AfCFTA and intra-African trade infrastructure, whether African governments ramp up processing, manufacturing, for example batteries, EV supply chains rather than just extract, domestic reform in African countries, policies on trade facilitation, infrastructure, finance, global demand for critical minerals, green tech, supply chains, and how African countries position themselves in that space. Africa's moment? Yes, but the clock is ticking. When two global giants punch each other out of the ring, someone else can take the stage. That someone could be Africa. The IMF views this disruption not just as a risk, but as a strategic opportunity for the continent to step up. But this isn't automatic. It takes deliberate policy, infrastructure investment, and smart repositioning. The world is changing. Africa can ride that wave or get washed aside. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, hit like and subscribe and share this video so more people understand why Africa might be the next big swing in global trade. The world is shifting. Africa has the chance. Will it seize it? Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.